What's going on, everyone? Welcome to the Tuesday, May 28th edition of the Ship My Money Show. I'm your host, Adam Scherer. You can follow me on Twitter at ShipMyMoney DFS. Hope everyone had a good Memorial Day weekend, and we're back today with a 10-game main MLB slate. If you look at the screen, you can see that the Mets and Dodgers are listed, but that game is not actually on the slate. It starts this afternoon. Slate starts at 7:20. So we have a 10-gamer. Should be pretty fun. Plenty of games to get through. Plenty of stuff to talk about. As always, hit the thumbs up button. Subscribe to the channel. Post a comment. All of that stuff helps out quite a bit. And if you have questions throughout the show, whether they are specific to tonight's slate or MLB DFS in general, feel free to throw those in chat. I will touch on the ones that I see. So we're going to start with the Nats taking on the Braves in Atlanta. Braves are pretty heavy favorites here, which isn't too surprising. Jake Irvin on the mound for Washington. Max Fried going for the Braves. No Ronald Acuna for the rest of the season for Atlanta. Tore his other ACL over the weekend. That obviously really sucks for him, for baseball fans in general. Sucks to see that, but he obviously won't be in the lineup today for Atlanta. Irvin still doesn't look like any sort of priority. He's not getting any ownership. He didn't show up very often in the lineups that I built. With or without Acuna, it's a very, very difficult matchup against Atlanta. Irvin is not bad, and he's certainly shown signs of improvement this season, but he's still not somebody that I think we really need to get to on a 10-game slate. On the other side for Fried, he's 8,800, projected for about 17% ownership. He only showed up in 6% of the lineups that I built. I am a little surprised by that because he is a very good pitcher. Now, we do have good pitching on this slate in general, but Fried overall this year, 3.36 xFIP. The one thing working against him is that he's never been a great strikeout pitcher. And this year, his strikeout numbers are even a little bit lower than in previous seasons, striking out 20.4% of hitters so far in 2024. It's not a great strikeout matchup against the Nats either. So I am surprised that he didn't show up more for me than he did. But I do understand it, at least in the context of the strikeout matchup with the Nats and also just Fried's natural strikeout stuff compared to some of the other pitchers on the slate. That's not to say that I think he's a bad play because, again, he's a very good pitcher. He can make up for some of that lack of strikeout upside, I guess, by going deep into games, not giving up runs, and certainly could just have a good strikeout game anyway. He's a good pitcher, but it does seem like the field's getting to a little bit more of him than I would like to. Certainly a talented pitcher, though. Offensively, I don't really anticipate getting to much of the Nats. The Braves are showing up even less because they're more expensive. Keibert Ruiz at 2,400, I guess, makes some sense as a punt at catcher, but that's really all that it is. Again, Fried is a very good pitcher. I don't particularly want to be taking bats against him. About a 100 expected ISO allowed to right-handed hitters since the start of last season for Fried, sub 100 this year as well. So again, he doesn't give up power, even though he's not the best strikeout pitcher. If you're getting to the Nats, I think it's mostly because of the value. On the other side, if you can afford Atlanta bats, then by all means, even without Acuna, they have plenty of good hitters. Irvin has still allowed a lot of expected power to lefties this year as well. 268 expected ISO to left-handed hitters, 231 since the start of last season. So as I mentioned, he has been a bit better than expected this year, 3.78 xFIP, but still doesn't strike out a lot of guys, still does give up power, especially to opposite-handed hitters. So if you can find the salary for, say, Ozzie Albies, he's going to look pretty good. Matt Olson will look good. Clearly, you can get to Austin Riley, Marcell Ozuna, even though they're right-handed, but from a split standpoint, Olson, Albies, Michael Harris, probably the guys that are going to be most interesting. There is also a good chance that Michael Harris is leading off now with no Acuna. That does make him look a little bit more appealing as well. He's still not priced to be leading off for a high-scoring Atlanta offense. Next, we have the Cubs taking on the Brewers in Milwaukee. 3.7 implied run total for the Cubs, 4.3 for the Brewers. Ben Brown is on the mound for the Cubs. Freddie Peralta going for the Brewers. Peralta should be one of the more popular pitchers on tonight's slate. The matchup against the Cubs isn't perfect, but it's not terrible. They have the sixth highest strikeout percentage against right-handed pitching this season at 24%. They have a 99 WRC plus. They do have some quality hitters, but again, Peralta, a very good pitcher, striking out 30.9% of hitters this year, 3.26 xFIP, very good strikeout pitcher, very good pitcher overall, projected for about 24% ownership, showed up in about 17% of the lineups I built. So one of the higher probability pitchers on the slate for me, even though I didn't get quite as much as the field. He does look very good. On the other side, Ben Brown coming in at 7,300. This is a young pitcher that has good stuff. Not a great matchup or park against Milwaukee. Middle of the pack strikeout percentage for the Brewers this year, 121 WRC plus on their active roster. So it is a scary spot for Brown. The price tag is pretty much where it should be. He's projected for about 5 to 6% ownership, and that's more or less where I ended up as well in the lineups I built at around 8%. If you need to get to him as a low-owned SP2 with some talent, that's perfectly fine. If we look at his stuff so far this year, he's made 5 total starts. He's pitched some other games in relief, but in his starts, 112.2 stuff plus score, obviously very, very good, striking out 26% of hitters. The talent is there. It's just a matchup and ballpark issue, and also an issue with just a ton of really good pitching on this slate. Offensively, I wouldn't anticipate getting to too much of the offenses here. Milwaukee certainly has a lot of talent. They're not a team that I really mind stacking regardless of matchup. But that being said, they aren't showing up much for me. The Cubs are showing up even less as far as 5-man stacks go. And it just has to do with the pitching talent here. Peralta, obviously, again, very, very good. Since the start of last year, only a 137 expected ISO to lefties, 166 to righties for Peralta. Brown overall this season, 177 expected ISO to lefties and 194 to righties. So he has given up some expected power in a limited sample. Again, you do have a lot of power in that Milwaukee lineup, but they also are pretty expensive. Willy Adames, 4,900. So that price has dropped a little bit. But William Contreras, 5,800. Christian Yelich, 5,500. Jake Bauers does have MPE, and he's 4,500, so he's showing up the most. But even that is only like 2% of the lineups I built. So nothing really offensively for me here. I think that if you were to go to the offenses, the two cases you make are in the Brewers, or in the Cubs case, rather, they're facing a popular Freddie Peralta, so you get negative correlation. In the Brewers case, they're just a really good offense, and they're not going to get any ownership, but pretty low probability spot. Next, we have Toronto taking on the White Sox in one of the higher probability spots on the slate. Game is in Chicago. We have Kevin Gausman going for the Blue Jays. Mike Clevinger on the mound for the White Sox. Sets up as a good spot for Toronto. Clevinger, in a limited sample this year, has been absolutely awful. If we go back to last season, he's been better, but still not great. Since the start of last season, a 158 expected ISO allowed against right-handed hitters, 207 to lefties. This year in the smaller sample, a 444 expected ISO allowed to righties so far. Obviously, that number is going to come down, but it is really bad. And Toronto obviously does have a lot of right-handed power in their lineup. Gausman on the other side should get a lot of ownership here at 8,500. Good spot against the White Sox, one of the weaker offenses in baseball. They rank 9th in strikeout percentage against right-handed pitching, only an 81 WRC plus. Is the worst of any team against right-handed pitching this year. So it does set up nicely for Gausman. Overall this season, his numbers are down a little bit, but a 3.21 xFIP is very good. The strikeout percentage is at 25%. But if you remember, he started off the year really slowly, so these numbers are kind of just getting back to where they normally are for him. He is a good pitcher. Again, I think coming in a little bit over-owned in terms of optimal percentage, but still one of the more likely pitchers to succeed on the slate. Clevinger, you can see, is going under-owned for me as well. That's purely a pricing thing at 5K. I don't think he's somebody that you actually need to be rostering. I certainly hope that I'm not getting to him. I don't want to. The case for him is simply the price. And then also he is facing a really popular Toronto offense. But on this slate, I don't think you're going to need to get to Clevinger all that much. There should be plenty of value hitting that you can use to get to the pitching that you want. And then somebody like Gausman isn't even that expensive at 8,500. It's not like the good pitching on this slate is all 10K plus or anything like that. So Gausman, the clear priority for me here. Offensively, the Blue Jays are showing up as the top 5-man stack for me at about 15%. They are showing up the most in all stack types at around 27%. They look really good against Clevinger. I mentioned his struggles with power, particularly right-handed power this year, but power in general going back to the start of last year. Danny Jansen at catcher, good spot in the lineup, is going to look good. Davis Schneider's been hitting the ball hard all season long. Second base and outfield eligibility at 4,300 looks good. Bo Bichette is cheap because of a slow start to the season, but somebody like Bichette has proven his ability to hit in the major leagues. I'm not overly concerned by, what he has done to date. It's much more likely that by the end of the season, his numbers are in line with where they usually are, which is much better than $4,300 against Mike Clevinger. So all of those guys look very good. Kiner Falefa is cheap with MPE as well. Another value bat you can get to. Those guys all projected for double-digit ownership. I am more or less around the field on all of them. Guerrero, Springer, Varsho, none of these guys are bad plays. The Blue Jays just look really good against Clevinger. You'll just need to find ways to be different within that lineup. John Warner said no Chicago weather concerns. There are. It's too early to really know how it's going to look. Looks like there are storms in the area. Definitely something to pay attention to later in the day. But beyond that, there's nothing really to say about it right now. It's not a clear washout or anything. It is something to pay attention to. The White Sox on the other side, clearly not as appealing as the Blue Jays. Kevin Gausman's really good. The White Sox aren't. They have individual guys that have some talent in their lineup. Tommy Pham, Benintendi, DeYoung, but just not a lot of power here. Really tough to want to get to them against Gausman unless it's for ownership reasons, negative correlation reasons with Gausman. That's really all that I can think of for the White Sox. Next, we have Kansas City taking on the Twins. Cole Reagan's on the mound for the Royals. Simeon Woods Richardson, it feels like, is pitching every day now for Minnesota, but he is back out there again. Reagan's looks very good. $10K salary, relatively expensive, but fully warranted this season. He's been excellent. 29.8% K percentage, 3.04 xFIP. If you subscribe to my betting package, I did bet his under today, but that doesn't have a ton to do with DFS. That was a price-related thing. I still really like Cole Reagans here. Showed up in 16% of the lineups I built. Fields at about 19%. I don't have any issues there. I'm not anticipating getting to Woods Richardson. $6,800 price tag. Not a great strikeout matchup against Kansas City. Not a great pitcher at all. So far this season, an 18% K percentage, 4.35 xFIP. But keep in mind as well that K percentage is driven up a bit by 2 starts, I think it was, against the White Sox, if I remember correctly. 1 start against the Mariners where he piled up strikeouts. Like, obviously, those games happened. You can't just erase them and pretend they didn't exist. But not every matchup is against the Mariners or the White Sox. And right now, they still make up a pretty high percentage of his year-to-date season numbers. He doesn't project as a great strikeout pitcher, in the major leagues. So I don't really see getting to him. Kansas City on the other side, I do have some interest in, which shouldn't be surprising to anybody. I'm always happy to get to KC. They're showing up 4th most in all stack types for me now, 4th most in 5-man stacks. You get Bobby Witt, which is always very appealing. Covers shortstop, gives you a very high upside play. You have some value with Frazier if he's in the lineup, Nelson Velasquez at 3,300, Hunter Renfroe at 3K, more good hitters with Perez, Pasquantino. Garcia's reasonably priced at third base. So I do like getting the KC against a pitcher that hasn't been bad so far this season, but I think is likely to be worse going forward than he has to date. So far, a 140 expected ISO allowed to lefties, 211 to righties. So he has given up more power against the righties. His changeup to lefties has been very effective so far. But again, keep in mind some of the teams that he has faced so far this season, as I mentioned before. But Bobby Witt individually, I think, looks great here. The rest of KC, any of them are fine to get to as well. Very difficult to want to get to Minnesota. Cole Reagans is just a monster. He's going to be relatively popular, but other than that, I don't really have a case for getting there. Righties have a 127 expected ISO with a 31.5% K percentage against them this year. He has only struck lefties out 21% of the time, but he has held them to an expected ISO below 100. So there's nothing I can point to with Cole Reagans that says, hitters are going to do well because of this. It's more so like, maybe he has one of the 3 bad games he'll have all season long, but that's clearly not something you expect to happen. The guy that showed up the most frequently for me from Minnesota is Carlos Correa. Showed up 1.7% of the lineups I built. So this team just isn't one that I expect to be getting to today, going up against Reagans in a tough spot. Diamondbacks are taking on the Rangers in Texas. Pretty high total in this game with Dane Dunning facing off against Brandon Pfaadt. Both of these pitchers are showing up for me right now. Both are low owned. I don't think that I actually get to that much of them. This is probably a case of it being early in the day and there just not being as much value bats in projected lineups as there probably will be most likely in actual lineups to come out on a 10-game slate. Dunning's strikeout stuff this year has been shockingly good. He has struck out 27.8% of hitters with a 3.69 xFIP. He doesn't typically work that deep into games. Texas seems to prefer him not to face the lineup a third time through. So that works against him. At 7,100, if you need a low-owned guy, I do think he's going under-owned given his strikeout stuff this year, how well he's pitched. But still wouldn't call him a priority given the other options on the slate. And then it is similar for Brandon Pfaadt. He's not a bad pitcher. 23.5% K percentage this year, only walking 4.5% of hitters, 19% K minus BB percentage, 3.59 xFIP. Solid pitcher, reasonably priced, not getting any ownership. I don't mind getting to him in large field tournaments if you need a pitcher in that price range, but it is a tough matchup against Texas. There's no real way around that. Overall, this season, Texas has the third lowest strikeout percentage on their active roster against right-handed pitching, 103 WRC plus. So you can see the reasons that Fod and Dunning aren't getting a lot of ownership. The matchup with Arizona is not great either. Against right-handed pitching this season, they have a 21% K percentage, 95 WRC plus. Clearly two talented offenses that are difficult to strike out. I just think both of these pitchers are a little underowned. They are both certainly viable contrarian SP2s if you need it on DraftKings. Offensively, Arizona stacks are showing up. It looks like seventh most for me. Texas is showing up further down. I don't think either team looks great, but it is a good park for home runs. It is two pitchers that are good, but neither has a track record of being elite yet. Brandon Fodd's a highly regarded prospect. He has been good so far this season. He's done a good job limiting power. Lefties with a 162 expected ISO, sub 100 to righties. Did give up more power if you go back to the start of last season when he debuted. 182 expected ISO to lefties, 171 to righties over that sample size. And you do just have good Texas bats. So, I can see getting to them for that reason. Dunning on the other side has never had the strikeout stuff that he's had this year, striking lefties out 30.7% of the time, righties 25.5%. If you go back to last season for comparison, those numbers, including this year, are 20.2% to lefties and 21.7% to righties. So while he has been really good at getting strikeouts this year, we don't know if that actually holds. And he has given up a lot of expected power this year. If you go back to last season, he was decent at limiting power, but didn't get a lot of strikeouts. Now he's getting a lot more strikeouts, but lefties have a 258 expected ISO. Righties have a 227 expected ISO against him. So it is an interesting spot to get to some Arizona bats. Just hope that Dunning makes mistakes. They're able to make contact. You can see Corbin Carroll getting about 13% ownership. Jock Peterson getting around 11. I'm below the field on that, but they are both showing up a pretty decent amount for me. Ketel Marte, Suarez, McCarthy, Walker. I don't mind any of these guys. Suarez and McCarthy are pretty cheap. Helps balance out the salaries for the rest of the lineup. Not that they're even that expensive. Like $4,400 for Corbin Carroll, just because he has started the season off slowly, is a really good price tag, especially when you factor in his stolen base upside as well. We know Jock Peterson has plenty of power from the left side. So a lot of power for Arizona. Reasonable pricing is why they're showing up a decent amount for me as far as stacking goes. Next, we have a Coors game with the Guardians taking on the Rockies. Tristan McKenzie on the mound for Cleveland. Ryan Feltner going for the Rockies. This does not look like a slate where I'll be getting to a lot of Feltner for once. 5,800 is certainly a reasonable price tag. Only showed up in about 5% of the lineups I built. Not a good strikeout spot against Cleveland. McKenzie showed up even less in 3% of the lineups. They're both projected for 1 to 2% ownership. I don't think there's much to say about the pitching here. Terrible park to pitch in. Ton of good pitching on the slate. I just don't really have a case for getting to either pitcher on this one. Cleveland showing up second most often from a stacking standpoint. Colorado is not. Colorado middle. Actually, they're fifth. I missed them when I looked the first time. I was going to say McKenzie has certainly struggled this year, so I would like to be getting to Colorado and was surprised when I wasn't. So they both look like top 5 stacks here. Not surprising in Coors. McKenzie, we know, pitching through an elbow injury. He's only struck out 20% of hitters this year, nearly a 14% walk percentage, 5.2 xFIP, 1.5 home runs allowed per 9 innings. He has really, really struggled. Lefties have a 286 expected ISO with just a 15% strikeout percentage. He's been much, much better against righties. 26.7% K percentage, 103 expected ISO to righties. So you can play these Rockies righties just because they're hitting in Coors Field, but the lefties are going to look better. Ryan McMahon in particular at 4,800 looks great. Charlie Blackmon looks good at 4,400. If you are stacking them, then by all means, go to Diaz at catcher, go to Tovar at shortstop. Rogers is cheap at second base. No issues with any of that, but we do have really, really drastic splits for McKenzie this year, favoring lefties, and like Ryan McMahon in particular, really, really good hitter for Colorado. On the other side, Feltner's been solid overall this season. Not great strikeout stuff in part because of pitching his home games at Coors Field. 20% K percentage, but a 4.01 xFIP, is solid. But this is a Cleveland team that's going to put the ball in play. They are in a park that rewards you for putting the ball in play. Only a 125 expected ISO to righties, 140 to lefties since the start of last season for Feltner. Pretty similar numbers so far this year as well. So again, I don't think he's a bad pitcher. You certainly can get worse pitchers going for the Rockies, but still a pretty nice spot for Cleveland, just given the park. And they didn't really get big price bumps. Jose Ramirez is 6,400. That's pretty normal pricing on Ramirez. Obviously, it's expensive, but it's not like he got any massive bump for Coors Field. Jimenez is at 5,400. Other than that, though, 4,100 for Tyler Freeman, most likely leading off. 4,200 for Brennan. $3K for Kyle Manzardo, who's a highly regarded hitting prospect. This is a Nailers expensive at 5,600, but he already had been as well. They're priced very similarly to how they have been in recent series, despite going into Coors Field. So getting to them here certainly makes sense, and the prices are not particularly prohibitive. Yankees are taking on the Angels in Anaheim. This park has been playing like Coors Field lately. Very good offensive park, and we just saw tons of offense in their most recent series against Cleveland. Griffin Canning going for the Angels. Nestor Cortez on the mound for the Yankees. Neither pitcher is getting much ownership. I don't really think that on this slate either one should. Canning showing up a little bit more often for me than the field at 9% of my lineups. Pretty close to the field with 6% Cortez, but neither one of them is any sort of priority. Canning is really cheap because he has been really bad this year. 16% K percentage, 5.15 xFIP. A lot of that is skewed by starting out the season really poorly. He is more talented, probably, just based on things that he's done in the past, than a $5,500 price tag. But this matchup isn't really one that I want to mess around with him. The Yankees don't strike out a lot. They have a 20% K percentage on their active roster against right-handed pitching. Their 129 WRC plus is better than every team in baseball so far this season. So not a spot where I really want to get too much Canning. And then Cortez is perfectly fine. The problem is just that he's a good strikeout pitcher, but not great. 23.9% K percentage this year. The Angels do have a lot of guys that hit left-handed pitching really well. The park is good for hitting, good for offense. And you just have so many other good pitchers on the slate, whether you're talking about Gossman, Peralta, Reagans, whoever it may be, that just have better strikeout stuff. They're in more favorable pitching environments. So I think Cortez works at 9,500 as a contrarian high upside play, but he does grade out, a step behind those other more popular pitchers. Offensively, I am personally interested in getting here. I'm curious to see where the stacks show up. And I'm happy to see the Yankees showing up as a top 5 stack for me. I like that against Canning, not only because he has struggled this year, which certainly he has. 156 expected ISO allowed to righties is not bad. 222 to lefties is worse. Since the start of last year, he's actually allowed a 202 expected ISO to righties, 175 to lefties. But there's just so much power in the Yankees lineup. There's such a good offense. Obviously, getting to Aaron Judge and Juan Soto is a no-brainer against anybody, but you have Volpe reasonably priced at shortstop, Torres sub 4K, Rizzo's reasonably priced, Verdugo's pretty cheap. Nothing wrong with a $4,800 price tag on Stanton. This offense just looks good. They're not getting as much ownership as I think they should be. So this looks like a team that if the slate started right now, I'd be getting to quite a bit based on how often they're showing up for me in the lineups that I built compared to the projected ownership, where you have teams seemingly preferring the Blue Jays, which I also preferring Cleveland, which I also prefer, but by bigger margins, I think, than I do. So the lack of ownership looks pretty appealing to me right now. Maybe that comes up by lock. It seems kind of low right now, just looking at it. Like Judge and Soto in particular are really only going to be 6 or 7% owned against Griffin Canning in Anaheim. I feel like those numbers come up, probably settle around like that 12, 13% mark where I'm getting them, but I think that's where they should be. So that's not problematic if it does happen. On the other side for the Angels, I think they're kind of interesting in tournaments just because they're cheap. They do have power, but the matchup against Cortez is not good. Their active roster has the 10th highest strikeout percentage against left-handed pitching, but they do have a 119 WRC plus with a 185 ISO since the start of last season against left-handed pitching. So again, there is upside here, even though it's not particularly likely to come through against Cortez. 170 expected ISO to righties since the start of last year, 146 this year. So again, tough matchup, but if you wanted to get 2 ace pitchers, stack, Rengifo, Adele, Ohapi, Pilar, Neto, and then get a really good mini stack or really good one-offs around them, I think that works. Also, if you wanted to go to like a more popular team like the Blue Jays and then mix in 3 of these guys, a 5-man Blue Jay stack with like 2 or 3 of Rengifo, Adele, Ohapi, something like that, you're going to get low-owned contrarian plays with those Blue Jays. They fit pretty nicely. They give you upside. I don't mind that approach, but again, it's pretty low probability against the pitcher as good as Nestor Cortez. Now, before I move on to the Marlins and the Padres, as a reminder, if you use the links in the description below, you can sign up for my MLB DFS package available through Dub Club. You can sign up using those links, get 20% off your first month. You get access to my Discord where I'm in there talking strategy throughout the day. You also get access to my projections, hitters, pitchers, top stacks, which are not updated for this slate yet, but top stacks, optimal percentages for every player, ownership projections, all of that stuff is available through there. So sign up using the link below, get 20% off, and I will see you in Discord later today. Now, moving on to the Marlins taking on the Padres in San Diego. Low total in this game. Matt Waldron is going for San Diego. Jesus Luzardo going for Miami. Waldron looks like one of the best value pitchers today at 6,200. Projected for 18% ownership. Showed up in 24% of my lineups. Again, cheap pitchers tend to just show up for me more earlier in the day than later in the day, and also more earlier in the day than their projected ownership. But I do think Waldron is just going to look like a good play here. 23.5% K percentage, 4.03 xFIP, solid matchup against Miami. Their active roster has a 22.5% K percentage, which ranks in the middle of the pack against right-handed pitching this year, but only an 89 WRC plus. It's just not a very good offense, and Waldron is pretty cheap here. Jesus Luzardo on the other side is kind of interesting to me from a talent standpoint because he's not getting much ownership. He's only 7,800. He enters this game with a 25.3% K percentage, 3.73 xFIP. He's a good pitcher. The problem is just this matchup is brutal, both in terms of San Diego being a good offense and also San Diego being extremely difficult to strike out. Their active roster against left-handed pitching since the start of last year has an 18.1% K percentage with a 109 WRC plus. Their active roster this year against right-handed pitching has a 17.5% K percentage. I mentioned against right-handed pitching just because, Luzardo obviously is left-handed. It doesn't matter. But a lot of times it can be problematic to look at like strikeout percentage for an active roster, especially against left-handed pitching, because sometimes you'll have left-handed bats that aren't going to play that drive that up artificially since you're looking at the roster and not the starting lineup. But my point here is that they just don't strike out against anybody. It doesn't matter what hand in this. It doesn't matter, what subset of players you're looking at. This team just doesn't strike out. So it makes it really tough for Luzardo, but he is cheap. He is in a good pitcher's park. If you just have a lineup where maybe you're stacking the Blue Jays, maybe you're stacking one of the other popular offenses, you're a little concerned about the total ownership of your lineup, you can at least get to Luzardo and say, look, I know it's a tough spot, but he does have really good stuff. He is a very good pitcher. Maybe he'll just strike the Padres out at an above average rate here. It's certainly, possible. Offensively, I don't anticipate getting too much here. The park is not good for home runs. Both pitchers are solid to good. San Diego and Miami's showing up a little bit more than San Diego. They do negatively correlate with Waldron, which is nice. They are reasonably priced. Jesus Sanchez showing up like 6% of the time for me and the field, along with Jazz Chisholm. But overall, neither offense here looks like a priority in this park or in these matchups. Houston's taking on Seattle in a another very good pitcher's park in Seattle. Hunter Brown is going for the Astros. Luis Castillo is on the mound for Seattle. Brown looks like another good value pitcher here. This is another guy that if you look at his overall numbers for the season, it's a bit deceiving. 21.8% K percentage, ridiculous 7.06 ERA, 1.87 home runs allowed per 9 innings. Keep in mind, he had a start this year where he gave up 9 earned runs in, I think it was 1/3 of an inning. That's just going to skew your numbers for a while. So even though he hasn't overall been as good this year as he was last year, it's still likely that he does end up more in line with last year's numbers than his year-to-date numbers so far this year. And while we're still getting him at a $6,500 price tag in a great strikeout matchup against the Mariners, who lead the league in strikeout percentage against right-handed pitching, I'm more than happy to go to him, especially in this park. Field, to me, has it right on, 15.4% projected ownership. He showed up in 15.4% of the lineups that I built. Certainly like Hunter Brown today at 6,500. Luis Castillo on the other side has a really tough matchup. Right now projected for 15% ownership, which is a little bit surprising to me given the matchup. 9,200 is certainly a reasonable price tag for him. He's a very good pitcher. It is a very good park. He has struck out 25.6% of hitters this year, 3.57 xFIP. There's no questions to me about the talent for Castillo. He is very, very good. I'm just a little bit surprised that, one, he's getting that much ownership in general on a slate where you have Regans, you have Peralta, you have Gossman, and then you also have the value pitching like Waldron and Brown, not to mention some other mid-range guys like Luzardo that aren't high priorities, but that are still serviceable pitchers. The other thing that's surprising to me is that Castillo right now is projected for twice as much ownership as Nestor Cortez. I think they're pretty similar plays given their matchups and very similar salaries. Castillo is the better pitcher, the better strikeout pitcher, all of that, but he is facing the Astros. The Astros this year against right-handed pitching have the lowest strikeout percentage in baseball. They have a 115 WRC plus. I think Castillo and Cortez are a lot more similar than it seems like the field is considering them. So it kind of makes me like saying it makes me like Cortez more probably isn't the right way of phrasing it, but it does make me think that if these ownership projections were to hold by the time we get the lock in the builds where I'm landing on like a Castillo or a Cortez to try and save some ownership and be a little bit different while maintaining upside, I would rather just go to Cortez if he is actually going to end up being projected for half the ownership. There is a good chance that those numbers kind of converge and they both get around 10%, in which case I don't really have a preference between the two. They're both in tough spots. They're both serving the same purpose within your lineups. Offensively, not a great matchup for either team. Both of these pitchers are good. Looking at five-man stacks, Seattle is coming in the middle of the pack. Houston's a little bit below them. As far as all stack types, Seattle does come in a little bit higher, and that's just because of the players and positions for Seattle. Like getting to full five-man Seattle stacks isn't super appealing in T-Mobile. The park isn't very good. But if you just like mini stack Dylan Moore, Luke Raley, Cal Raleigh, that opens stuff up for you. Cal Raleigh is one of the better hitting catchers in baseball, and he's reasonably priced. Dylan Moore has power with multi-position eligibility. Luke Raley has power and is very cheap in the outfield. Dominic Canzone is only 2,900. So you can see how like 2 or 3 Mariners as mini stacks could fit pretty easily into multiple different types of roster construction, and you are still getting upside there against Hunter Brown, even though it's not a great matchup. So far this season, Brown has held lefties to a 120 expected ISO. Righties have been held to a 157 expected ISO. So again, it's not that he's giving up a lot of power. This park isn't good for home runs. But if you just wanted to bet on cheap, relatively low-owned talent, especially in the case of like Raley and Raleigh, it's not a bad approach, but still not a spot that I love getting to. Houston, you are purely betting on talent. We know Luis Castillo is extremely good. He does have a tendency to give up some power. His fastball, if he's not locating it well, can get hit pretty far. It is pretty flat. Lefties this year have a 206 expected ISO, and they've also only struck out 20% of the time. Since the start of last year, they have a 25.5% K percentage, but still a 211 expected ISO. Yordan Alvarez, Kyle Tucker, 2 of the best left-handed hitters in all of baseball. So certainly no issues getting there, especially when Alvarez right now is projected for 2% ownership. Tucker's projected for 1%. Even if those numbers come up a little bit and they're 4 or 5%, they are very, very, very good tournament plays despite the tough matchup with Castillo. And then also if Castillo does keep getting projected for 15% ownership, that works in their favor as well. So again, not that I love the Astros here, but particularly Tucker and Yordan Alvarez are pretty interesting considering the one flaw that Castillo has is a propensity to give up left-handed power. Finally, wrapping things up in San Francisco with the Phillies taking on the Giants. Pretty high implied run total here for the Phillies as they go up against Tommy Romero. Zach Wheeler is on the mound for the Giants, or against the Giants, his former team, giving us another ace on this slate, $10,800 price tag, and a massive, massive park shift for Zach Wheeler, projected for 20% ownership. He only showed up 9% of the time for me. Probably comes up a little bit by lock. Probably, again, just has to do with lack of value in projected lineups, but he is also really expensive. There are also good pitchers that I can get to at similar ownership that are less expensive. 27.9% K percentage, 3.26 xFIP, average matchup against the Giants. 21.5% K percentage, ranks 18th against right-handed pitching this year. 109 WRC plus is obviously very good. Again, a really good park for Wheeler. So I think he's a good play. I don't necessarily think he's at that salary like as good a play as somebody like Ragans for less or Gossman for less. So I think that's one reason why you see the lineups that I built having a little bit less of him. Tommy Romero, no interest there. On the other side, I don't anticipate getting to the Giants. I do think the Phillies look decent. The park isn't good for offense. We know that, but it is a decent enough matchup here against the Giants. Real Muto, Stott, Harper, Schwarber, all look fine. This team is really expensive, though, is also the problem. They would be showing up more without a doubt if they were cheap. But when you have pretty much every guy that you want in the lineup priced above 5K, it becomes really difficult to 5-man stack them. Like if you just go Real Muto, Stott, Harper, Schwarber, Alec Baum, it's really expensive. And mixing in, Castellanos and more specifically Sosa and Rojas just isn't super appealing. Like there's a lot of other guys that you can play at similar prices that look better. So I think that is going to hold down Philly stacks a little bit, but goes without saying, if you're getting to Real Muto, Harper, Schwarber, there's nothing wrong with that. But overall, I think this is a game where you're probably getting to Zach Wheeler, and that's probably your biggest priority there. Top stacks for me on the slate: Toronto, Cleveland, Yankees, I really like, Kansas City, Colorado. Happy getting to all 5 of those. I think mixing in some Arizona makes some sense, but Toronto, Cleveland, Yankees, KC, Colorado, I would say not only are they the 5 teams showing up the most for me, I think they were the 5 that even just going through the show made the most sense. They're the ones that even if I hadn't looked at how often I was getting to them, I would have thought that they were showing up a lot. Pitching wise, you have Cole Reagans, a lot of good pitching at the top. Reagans, Peralta, Gossman, Zach Wheeler, again, not coming in as often for me as the field, but still looks very good if you can find the salary. For value, I think you're looking at Matt Waldron and Freddie Peralta. If you need low-owned pitching, I think Dane Dunning, Brandon Pfaadt, and Jesus Luzardo are probably my favorite contrarian plays. Luzardo getting around 6% ownership, less than 5% projected to Dunning and Pfaadt. I don't think any of them are great plays, but they are just talented enough pitchers but in tough matchups, but reasonably priced and low owned. I think that's where I would look as far as contrarian plays if I need to. For a home run pick, I will go Dalton Varsho in Chicago against Mike Clevinger. Feel like that's far enough down the board that I can get away with that one. So give me Varsho there. Other than that, thank you for checking out the show. Don't forget to hit the thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel, all that stuff. If you want to get access to my projections, my top stacks, all of that, my Discord, use the link in the description below, 20% off your first month. Other than that, have a good rest of your Tuesday. Good luck on your lineups tonight. See you back here for tomorrow's slate.